5 words would you choose?
I would say writer, feminist, queer, Jewish, Mizrahi.
Okay, so a lot to ask about that. So throughout history, people give themselves different labels of their identity, and at different times, different labels, I guess, take priority over other labels. So why did you choose those 5, and which ones are, I guess, more important than the others?
I sort of mentally ranked them in order of importance as they sit with me currently on this day at this time. But I think those are constantly shifting, as I'm sure for everyone in this room, if you had to say 5 identities, they're probably constantly in flux. And for the Jewish people more broadly, I think we also have different ways of identity that shift depending where we are in history and time and place. And I think that's as it should be.
Okay, and I guess, let me ask about race. So, how many people in this room, you don't need to say it, but how many people in this room know what race they are? Just put up your hand if you know what race you are. Okay. Put up your hand if you don't know your race. You're not sure what your race is, if you have to fill it in.
What do you mean by race? That's
okay. So, the reason I'm asking the question is because I can tell you often when I'm teaching and I ask students what's their race, they have no idea what their race is. They'll know their religion, they'll know their nationality, but they might not know their race. So can I ask you, Sigal, what is your race?
Race is a made-up construct, so for people who aren't sure maybe what their race is, that makes perfect sense to me. Race is something that's talked about biologically, but actually it's constantly, how a certain race is defined is constantly shifting. As I said, at different times in history, different places. So who was characterized, for example, as white in 1900 in America is different from who is characterized as white now. So, for example, in America, Italians, Irish were not categorized as white, and Jews we'll get into a bit more later, is also complicated. So racism is a category that often tricks us, I think.
So if it's like you said, it's a made-up concept, so then why are we doing a session about something that is made up?
Great question. So unfortunately, things that are made-up concepts still have very real effects on our world. And even now, even if a lot of us would say now, oh, this is a made-up concept, because of policies that were enacted historically when people really believed in this concept, those policies have a legacy that's often intergenerational that is still impacting people to this day. So it's still important, unfortunately, to talk about that because its effects are still very real.
So given that its effects are very real, in America there's a term that they use, person of colour. Are people familiar with that term here? Yeah, so what does it mean if someone's a person of colour?
I think broadly speaking, at least the way it's used in America, people generally use it to mean anyone who's non-white. So, which could mean a lot of very different people, but people who would not be, and again, whiteness being sort of a made-up category, I'm going to say that what we mean by that is anyone who wouldn't be perceived as white, anyone who wouldn't be treated as white, I would say is a person of color.
And the next definition question before I get to our topic is, what is an ethnicity?
Okay, so an ethnicity is different from race. It's not presumed to be this biological thing. It's a cultural thing, so it's based on very real similarities. It's defining a category of people based on nationality, ancestry, but also your language, your religion, sort of cultural, regional practices that you might have in common with people.
Okay, and so does anyone here in the audience want to say 5 words you would use to define yourself? Now that we've defined sort of race, ethnicity, does anyone here want to volunteer? What words do you use to describe yourself? Anyone? You can just use 2, yeah. Do you want to stand up and talk to everyone? Yeah, sorry to embarrass you, you're in the front row. Yeah.
It's a very tough one. Give me a second, guys. Independent, happy, intelligent, funny, I'm going to stop the bubble.
Okay, alright. So, can I ask you, just reflecting on that, so Adam shared a lot of character traits. You didn't share any character traits. Why does your sexuality, the colour of your skin, your ethnicity, why were they more important than character traits when I asked you to identify yourself?
To be honest, I think it's just the framing of this session. If I were asked in a wildly different context, I would answer as you did. That being said, the facets of the 5 things that I mentioned about my identity, I think, do shape a lot of my experience in the world and how I move through the world. So I would also maybe say happy as a quality, but how I am able to be happy is modulated by those 5 characteristics that I talked about.
Your number 1 was writer. Isn't that an occupation?
Yes. Writer, yeah, kind of saying I'm happy writer is kind of an oxymoron, sort of clashes with the writer stereotype, I'm afraid, so.
Cool. So maybe now that we've defined all these terms, tell us a little bit about how you got writing about people of colour and your family story.
So I became really interested writing about this whole question of Jews of colour a few years ago in particular. At the time I was the opinion editor at The Forward. I, growing up, never saw, I grew up in a very Ashkenazi-dominated community in Montreal. I never really saw Jews who looked like me represented, never mind in the media, even in my own Jewish history classes. But this is what my family looks like. Which, first of all, like, I just want us all to appreciate the fashion sense going on in this family. It's pretty epic. This is my family on my dad's side. They're Baghdadi, so Iraqi Jews who moved to India, to Bombay, in the 1800s, where a lot of Jews moved as merchants from Iraq at the time. And there are other Indian Jewish communities like the B'nai Israel who have been there 2,000 years longer. But that's where that side of my family kind of came up, and my mother's side of the family is Moroccan. And I think as I started to think more critically about being a journalist in a kind of Jewish media space and thinking about what kind of Jewish stories get told and what kinds don't, this was an image that I really seldom, if ever, saw.
So with that in mind, in Canada and also in America and possibly in Australia, do you think most Jews identify as white or as people of colour?
That's a really good question. Most Jews, I don't know. I think that in the US, probably most Jews identify as white. And in Canada as well. The US is the vast majority of Jews are Ashkenazi. And so I think they probably identify as white, and certainly after World War II. Before World War II, Ashkenazi Jews had an uncertain racial status in America. After, in the post-war era, Jews really started to be coded as white more and more. So I think most of them now would identify as white. In Australia, you all are more well-equipped to tell me than I am to tell you.
What do you think? Anyone in the audience, do you think most Jews in Australia would identify as white or?
Yes.
Okay, so this brings up an interesting dilemma for us.
You might identify, or you might not. It might not be on your radar.
Yeah.
And then someone says something to you.
Right.
That happened to me.
Yeah.
And it's like, oh, you know. So then you realise that you're not thought of that way, even by Jews.
Right. So it's interesting. So what you're saying, yeah. So your race is something that's often defined by other people more than yourself sometimes. Again, I can just share an anecdote. When teaching, when I ask kids what their race is, they say they're Australian. And that means that they're white. And if they're not white, then they'll say they're Lebanese, Italian, Greek, etc. So sometimes in Australia, the word Aussie means white. Obviously, it's false because Australian could be many races, but it's a word we use. The reason this has become a big issue recently is because of this film. And just for those that aren't familiar with the story, so the lead actress of this film is Gal Gadot, who's Israeli, and when the early promotion began for this film, the film is about a superhero who saves people and does good things. I haven't actually seen it yet, but I've heard that it's a fantastic film. And when this came out, there was two sorts of commentaries. One was about, isn't it wonderful that there's a female superhero instead of a male one? But then there was a critique of the film. There were many blogs that did this. I just picked this blog from South Africa, and the blog was kind of saying, why in 2016 is Wonder Woman still white? The story of Wonder Woman is that she comes from the Amazon, and you would assume that the lead character would have been Brazilian or someone with darker skin. And so someone said, why can't they cast a woman of colour as the lead role? And so there were a lot of blogs that said this. Then in response, there was another blog from comicbook.com, which I don't know how serious a blog that is, but apparently, they have things to say. And this blog responded by saying, no, Gal Gadot is white because she's Israeli, and therefore means that she is not white. So the question I have for you is Wonder Woman white?
So I would say she's white, and that's going back to the logic that I said a couple minutes ago. I think race and whiteness is a fake construct to begin with. It's a slippery, culturally determined, historically determined concept. So when I ask, so to me the only way it makes sense to ask, is someone white, is to ask, are they perceived as white? Are they treated as white, pragmatically? And I would say that she definitely is. She is an Ashkenazi Jewish Israeli who in Israel reaps all the benefits that comes with that identity. She is not treated the way, let's say, Mizrahi or an Arab Israeli might be treated. And certainly in Hollywood, she's regarded as white. She was regarded as white enough to play this role, and in the film, her character's mother is played by a white Danish woman. The little girl who plays her as a little girl in a kind of flashback is very much like a white little girl. And in the movie, from dialogue she has with other characters, you can see that this character is perceived as white. So I see no evidence in how this woman is treated that would indicate that she's not white. Okay, so I found a blog that disagrees with you. The internet will do that. The internet will do that. And so this blogger on the Times of Israel says that Ashkenazi Jews are a people of colour. I don't want to share his argument.
Except the ones who were raped and pillaged and ended up with ancestors like myself and many other people in the world with blue or green eyes and fair hair. And that must be as a result of rape and pillage if we were all Ashkenazi Jews coming from...
You may have read this blog.
No,
because Danny Ittay Flescher, who calls himself half Irish, half Jewish, American activist, musician, and writer, he says, do you want to read the quote for me? Do you want to read it from the screen? Yeah.
White people don't need to change their names, or flatten their noses, or bleach their skin, or straighten their hair, or take their kippas off to pass as white. The fact that Ashkenazim and white passing Jews in general need to work just to be seen as regular people really says it all. And many, if not most, don't even have the ability to do that. Okay. All in all, we mustn't make the mistake of assuming Jews enjoying white privilege just because our experiences are not symmetrical with those of African Americans or Hispanics, as to do so would be unreasonable, fallacious, and hypocritical. Again, no other ethnic minority is held to this standard. Anti-Jewish racism looks different because the stereotypes are different. In other words, we are not viewed by society as uneducated thugs, but as dishonest, conniving, clannish, and bloodthirsty mongrels who control everything behind the scenes. And these racist tropes play out in the way we are treated in this country. Wow.
So just to summarise, what you're saying is because Jews experience disadvantage, therefore they're not white. How would you respond to that?
So that's one argument I see often, and the other one, maybe you have a slide to this, I think?
Yes, I do. Yeah.
Another argument that's made, not in this camp, is the Holocaust, really. Jews are not treated as white, don't enjoy the privileges, and Jews have endured so much persecution, have been racially marked as other in such kind of tragic and horrifying ways. So how can we possibly say Jews are white? Again, I think it's like that nuanced intervention that has to happen here, which is to say, depends when and where you're talking about. So I think that, I think that this writer is making some good and valid points, right? So in 1930s America, New York, let's say, a Jew would have had to, work harder than someone else might have had to pass as white. That's true. I think in 2017 New York, that may be a little bit, I would argue that's a lot less true. I also think this point about, comparing with African American or Hispanic and worrying that these aren't symmetrical experiences, that's another kind of like really interesting point to think about. I think you can say that sometimes Jews pass as white, and sometimes Ashkenazi Jews pass as white, and sometimes they don't. But still realize that there's different types of and degrees of discrimination that people experience. So I think to be African American in the US is to experience kind of state level, at the institutional level, types of discrimination that perhaps a lot of Jews don't experience in this day and age in the US. So I think it's perfectly understandable and right for Ashkenazi Jews to say, look, we've endured persecutions like the Holocaust, like there's obviously some traumatic memory there, and that's very, very real. But I think there's also a sensitivity that has to happen, the sensitivity of realizing that now in 2017, some people are still enduring state-level kind of institutional discrimination in a way that our current experience does not match.
So with that point, and I'm not saying everyone has to agree with Sigal, but having now heard that, are people in this room more likely to, yes, identify as white or not identify as white as a result of this conversation?
What I find just...
Do you want to just stand up so I can hear you?
I just find it at this level, growing up in Australia, I never had an issue in my own mind, and I've been involved professionally with a lot of multicultural communities.
And the whole package would be Jews of color creating and controlling the narrative, which to my knowledge has not been done before. So it was a pretty cool thing. The series included African American, Indian, Chinese, Mizrahi, Korean, all sorts of Jews. And what was really gratifying to see was at the end of 2015, when we looked over our online traffic report annually, we saw that all of these pieces were in the top 25 most read pieces of the year, which A, shows me that there's a ton of appetite among readers to see this stuff discussed, and B, is like a great way to convince editors that this is a story that needs to be told. It's like, no one's going to argue with those numbers.
So on that, I just want you to tell me about Ayana Nachmias and her story.
So these are a few of the different writers who are represented in the series, but I'll just tell you about this woman here on the bottom right, Ayana Nachmias. She wrote a piece, the first piece in the series, which was called Why My Biracial Son Doesn't Want to Date Jewish Girls. So she converted to Orthodox Judaism and was going to Chabad and sometimes modern Orthodox shuls. And
In the US? US or?
in the US, yeah. And her son, first of all, basically, she recounts this experience that I've heard from several African American Jews that they have this experience, first of all, of when you walk into the synagogue, it's not like people say, hey, Shabbat Shalom, prayers are starting in 5 minutes. People assume you're the help. people assume you're there to do the catering or whatever it is, or the cleaning. So there's that experience, which I've heard echoed by many people. Her son, who I think was about 8, 10 years old at the time, started being bullied a lot and was bullied and sort of socially rejected so much from kindergarten all the way through to the end of Hebrew school. And was sort of not invited to birthday parties and, you know, who do you get to sit with at lunch and all that sort of thing. And as a result of feeling just consistently rejected like that, he didn't want to date any girls in the Jewish world, just sort of assuming that he would face the same rejection there.
So, I mean, it's a heartbreaking story, and it's something that, you know, I think when we try and bring in the Melbourne Jewish community into that, it's an issue we don't talk about. To the best of my knowledge, I can't remember many articles about that in the Australian Jewish news. So I want to ask the people in this room, do you feel that the Jews of colour in our community would face similar challenges to being accepted that Sigal talked about in the United States?
Wouldn't it depend on whether it was an Orthodox synagogue or like, for instance, in our Kehillat Mitzvah, we definitely have members who are converts, or perhaps maybe children of converts,
yeah,
and they're very well accepted. So maybe it depends how Orthodox.
I don't think how Orthodox.
Or what
is
sort of shul.
What sorts of shuls?
I disagree with that.
Okay, yeah. Do you
Sorry,
want
I disagree. Both from a
to just stand up so it's easier to hear you? Sorry.
So, both from a shul perspective, and we tend to modern Orthodox shul, name it or not, and from a school perspective, where I'm actively involved with the enrolment of students at one of the biggest J schools in Melbourne, I see there is a lot of acceptance, and I think part of it is an issue, and I don't want to, this is probably not going to come out the novelty. It is still unusual within our community to see people, a wide variety of people from different backgrounds and different colours and different races. Yet we have that all within our community, and it's probably still, as I said, quite small numbers. But I think to give a parallel, when we have students enrolling or people becoming involved with a name that's a bit unusual, and there are a range of unusual names in that children are being named nowadays, we also get that, and it can be a white child, but it can be an unusual name, and I can say a name to colleagues, or I can say a name to other families, and you can hear a snigger, you can hear a giggle, and it's just that novelty factor. As with anyone, once you get to know them, once they're integrated, I don't think there is an issue. We welcome people to our shop, our shul on normal Shabbos, you know, not for any reason, and I think a snigger here when you describe what happened to people coming into a shul. And I don't think anyone meant that in a cruel or malicious way. It is just a novelty and it's a release. But you get past that straight off, and I think I don't see people as being exclusionary based on colour. And I think you know, characteristics, traits, that's my experience. That would be a different thing, and that's something that you learn as you get to know the person, not on appearance.
Hold on, do you want to respond to that?
I'm sorry, were you saying that, one thing wasn't clear to me, were you saying that, let's say if an African-American Jew, for example, might walk into shul, there might be like a little like laugh or something?
No, I'm not. I'm just saying that that's how it was mirrored here when you mentioned that story. I think that people might look in the first instance, sure, you look, and you go into any shul, you see someone you don't know coming in, you tell me that you're all looking to see who it is. I don't think that's hugely different from that fact. No, I don't think there would be a laugh.
So maybe just on that comment, can you explain what the word Ashkenazi means? Because I know that's a word we're starting to hear more, and I think Ashkenazi could describe a lot of things that go on in Melbourne. So what does that word mean for you?
So when it's the question of what is considered normative or what is considered usual, right? So I think you used the word unusual, and an unusual name, someone who looks unusual. So it's like to step back for a second and think like, well, what is the usual, right? Yeah, I mean, I think even like an earlier slide said, that Ashkenazi Jews have to work harder than other white folks to be considered regular people, right? Well, it's this like question of why are those people the regular ones and these ones are irregular? So it's this sort of dominant assumption that Ashkenazi is the default setting of Jewishness.
Yeah, so it could be an example for if you talk about Jewish food, people will say cholent, borscht,
Right.
you know, those sorts of Eastern European food, and they might not say an Iraqi fish dish or
Yeah.
you know or kubel.
Unless
Yeah.
you're in Singapore, Jewish food is Iraqi food.
Yeah.
I did not know what kubel was until I was 17 years old. I was really baffled.
If it's a fish, then I'm missing out on anything there.
I know.
Okay, question over here.
Yeah. My question is, okay, so this piece that I wrote, to be honest, was born out of my own massive confusion. I just didn't know the answer to this question because, and actually when I Googled, prior to writing this piece, when I Googled are Mizrahim people of color, pretty much like actually nothing came up, which is rare for Google these days, except for one blog post which addressed this question in one sentence. There was no substantial in mainstream media unpacking of this question. So as a reporter, I did what reporters do and like just decided to approach this very personal question as a journalist. And I started reporting it out. I started calling a bunch of people, I spent weeks talking to Black Jews, Latin American Jews, just like from every possible angle, as well as the US Census Bureau, kind of coming at it from the government's perspective. What I found out is actually like nobody knows the answer to this question. There actually is not an answer, so it's kind of what you make of it situation. An interesting, just a factoid is that the U.S. Census Bureau still doesn't know. Currently, the Census Bureau defines white as people who have origins in Europe, the Middle East, or North Africa. But Arab American groups are currently lobbying to have Middle East and North Africa taken out of the white category and considered a separate category, which is an interesting, because it would be more beneficial to this community at this point to be considered as such. You become eligible for minority funding and things like that. Which you kind of have to do that to kind of get your community what it needs at a certain time in history. Interestingly, it's a total reversal from a century ago. In the early 20th century, Arab American groups lobbied to be considered white because the danger at that time, again, the history, contextual piece, the danger then was that they were going to be classified as Asian. And there were all sorts of discriminatory immigration policies against Asians. So anyways, even the government doesn't know how to classify Mizrahi Jews and Arab Americans as well. And so I reported it out, and eventually came to the conclusion that I personally was going to identify as a Jew of color, both because I wanted to unsettle questions or assumptions within the Jewish community that Jewish equals white, and because I genuinely have often felt like I moved through the world as a perpetual other. Just kind of definitely growing up felt like an alien in the world where I grew up. So there's a performative aspect to it that's like purposely designed to unsettle assumptions as well as like a genuine kind of experiential aspect to it. And just briefly, I'll just honestly tell you, I have never been so nervous to hit publish on anything I've written as I was with this, because it's a race and you're bound to piss off somebody. So I really published it with bated breath and was incredibly relieved and gratified to find that it's also the piece that I've gotten the most email response to. I've never written anything that's gotten such a huge flood of responses into my inbox as a result. And I heard from Mizrahi Jews of all ages all across the world saying, oh my God, I've been asking myself this question for decades and I never had any resources or way to like grapple with this question. So I'm so glad someone is finally like unpacking it. And often people would email me just like reams of their own questions that they're still grappling with as a result. So I don't think it closed the conversation, but just opened it.
So a month after Donald Trump was...
We're standing in solidarity with one another, realizing that both of these groups were being mistreated by the Ashkenazi elite at the time. And they talked about forming Jewish Arab youth groups to kind of form a bridge. They talked about, they would protest together in the street. They talked about fighting to gain better medical access for both of their communities, better water access, and intellectuals made kind of reasoned programmatic cases for why these two communities should band together. Again, this was in the 50s, this was very early on. And I think that history has been really largely forgotten. And it's a part of why I think like history is really important, historians are really important, is that we can kind of resuscitate those memories and think nowadays how we can kind of play them out in real time.
So we're a little bit short of time, so we've only got time for one final question, which is if you're the leader, if you're the next Secretary General of the UN, and or the next Prime Minister of Israel, which I think would be fantastic, what would you like to see change in the Jewish world about this question of race?
I think one word that is sort of the bane of my existence is authentic. I hate this word authentic, and I think particularly it gets applied in the Jewish community where we talk about what is an authentic Jew, what is authentic Judaism. I hear this all the time lately, and I think a lot of people, including in my own family, when they picture what is an authentic Jew or authentic Judaism, they picture an Ashkenazi, ultra-Orthodox man with long peyot. It's very weird that people, even in my family, picture that, right? That's how deeply ingrained this image is. So what I would like to see change is that when we think what is authentic Judaism, we just picture a much wider array of Jews and Judaisms and realize that Judaism can look many different ways and those are all valid and fascinating. So,
Yeah. Before I